Hi there, and welcome to Her Season of Strength, where women over 40 reclaim their bodies, their energy, and their voices without apologies. I'm Kim Duffy, registered dietitian, personal trainer, mom, and your biggest hype woman when it comes to aging like you mean it. This show isn't about chasing skinny or counting wrinkles. It's about building real strength, physical, emotional, and hormonal. Each week, I'll share straight-talking nutrition tips, sustainable fitness strategies, and conversations that help you feel powerful in your skin once again. Menopause isn't an ending, it's only the beginning. This is your season of strength. Hello, and welcome back to Her Season of Strength. It is already April. I cannot believe it. This episode will come out on April 9th. I'm recording it here the week before. We're just heading into Easter in a couple days, and I am really loving the sunshine. This time of year is like my favorite, just because the weather's turning warmer, the snow is melting, and even if it does get really cold and it snows and stuff, it's not going to be around for long, right? Oh, I love it, love it, love it, love it. So let's get down to some real talk here. So I fully admit that I will walk into a room and know that I had a reason to be there, and will stand there and I'll look around and I'll walk back out. I'll go back to where I was before, and then all of a sudden it'll come back into my head of like, this is what I was going to do when I was there. But it is amazing how you can just completely blank out. You go, even if it's just like, I was in the kitchen. I literally took less than 30 seconds to walk up the stairs, go into my room, and completely forget while I was there. Now, I can't say this didn't happen earlier in my life, but I sure feel like it happens way more often since I hit menopause. And then those times when, you're at the store or something and you see someone and you see their face and you're like, I know I should know their name. And, it could even be somebody that is, super familiar to you. You see all the time and you can't for the life of you remember their name. And it can be a little scary. I don't know about you, but it's like I immediately go to the worst of like, oh no, I'm starting to have early onset Alzheimer's, or I'm getting dementia, or something's wrong, because it's scary. You're like, what happened to my brain? But I want you to hear this, because I think there can be so much relief come when you understand the biology of why we're seeing more of this postmenopausal. And also, there's something that we can do about it, right? So today, I kind of want to talk about the why we see that more brain fog when it, as far as menopause, why some of us can start worrying we go to that place of, Alzheimer's and dementia for the first time in our lives, especially, as we watch our parents aging. And then I also want to introduce you to one of the most researched, evidence-backed eating patterns that's specifically tied to brain health. And it's called the MIND diet, MIND. And by the end of the episode, I hope you can understand exactly how food on your plate can either help to feed or fuel or starve your brain. Okay, so some things, I want to start first of all with kind of that estrogen connection, because we always seem to be tying everything back to estrogen and menopause, because you know what? That's who we are. That's what my focus is. That's what my passion is, because I'm in the middle of it. And that's where, all of you guys are too, or the grand majority of people that are listening to this are women in perimenopause and menopause. So first of all, estrogen isn't just this reproductive hormone for women. It plays a direct role in our brain function, in our memory, and in our cognitive performance. That's just kind of how our brain functions and performs. Estrogen supports the production of a couple, big words, acetylcholine and serotonin. You've heard of serotonin before, I know that. And what those are neurotransmitters that can affect our memory, our mood, and our focus. And as our estrogen declines in perimenopause and menopause, the brain literally has to adjust to operating with less of this neuroprotective hormone. And the hippocampus, it's part of your brain, is directly affected. And it is the memory center, and it is loaded with estrogen receptors. So when our estrogen drops, the hippocampus becomes less efficient. And this is why, it's hard to retrieve those words. It's hard to, that short-term memory is challenging, and working memory are the first things that we're noticing that are kind of slipping. But then we add in a little sleep deprivation, because most of us were not sleeping as well as at night due to maybe night sweats, but also due to that hormonal disruption. 3 a.m., all of a sudden we're wide awake. And sleep is so important. It's when our brain, clears all that metabolic waste, and it consolidates memories, and it repairs and heals itself. So poor sleep it's literally one of the most damaging things for our cognitive function. And, so many women are just running from point A to point B at this age, and they're running on fumes. Next is inflammation and cortisol. So when we have that, we start to see that chronic low-grade inflammation. We talked about this with cardiovascular health as well in a couple of the past 2 episodes. And that low-grade inflammation naturally increases during menopause. We see elevated cortisol from stress that can physically shrink our hippocampus, that part of our brain, over time. And this is one of the key reasons why stress management, it's not just this woo-woo type idea. It's really a brain health strategy. So managing our stress, even though you may not necessarily go, all of this stress is really affecting my body. You're like, I'm handling it just fine. People think that, they're go, but it's all good. I'm fine. I'm dealing with it perfectly, right? Well, it does have an effect on our body, right? And so we need to find those ways to help bring that stress down, like with meditation and breath work and movement, exercise, getting outside, just taking time for ourselves. But, the dementia fear, it's real and it's valid. As we're seeing our parents age, many of us are watching Alzheimer's or dementia up close for the first time. And it's scary. And also, women are disproportionately affected by Alzheimer's. Nearly 2/3 of those diagnosed with it are women. And that's even more scary. And this isn't a coincidence. Researchers actually believe that hormonal shifts of menopause can play a role in increasing our risk. But the good news is this is not inevitable. And there is a significant body of research showing that lifestyle factors have a really powerful influence on our risk. And I just want to take a moment here, because I know that this can really hit close to home for people. If you've watched a parent or a loved one go through Alzheimer's or dementia, the fear of that happening to you, it's real, it's heavy. And I hear you. And I want today's episode to feel like a little bit of hope, because I truly believe that knowledge is power. And you're not without options here. There are things that we can do. So now I want to go into kind of the main part of what I want to talk about today on the podcast. And that is the MIND diet. So MIND diet stands for Mediterranean. I'm sure we've all heard about that. /dash, DASH, intervention for neurodegenerative delay. Blah, it's a mouthful, right? And it was actually developed by a nutritional epidemiologist named Dr. Martha Claire Morris at Rush University Medical Center. And it combines 2 super well-researched eating patterns, and that is the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet. But it specifically targets brain health and Alzheimer's prevention. It was published research in the Journal of Alzheimer's and Dementia, and it showed that the MIND diet was associated with a slower rate of cognitive decline and a significantly reduced risk of Alzheimer's disease. So in this research, the original study, it followed over 900 adults for an average of 4.5 years. Those who followed the MIND diet most closely had a 53% reduced risk of Alzheimer's disease. That's big. 53%. It's a lot. And even those who followed it moderately, not perfectly, showed a 35% reduction in risk. That's not a small number. It's significant, and it should really get your attention. So how it differs from other diets. So the Mediterranean, the DASH diets, they're generally healthy, but they're kind of more broad, right? The MIND diet gets real specific about the foods that have the most direct impact on the brain. It identifies 10 brain healthy food groups to eat regularly and 5 food groups to limit or avoid. But this, just like this whole podcast, it is not about perfection. Even moderate adherence showed measurable benefit. So let's walk through these 10 brain healthy food groups. First one's, not surprisingly, leafy greens. We're shooting for 6 or more servings per week. Excuse me. So what are those going to include? Things like kale, spinach, collard greens, arugula, Swiss chard. And the reason why they're so good for us, they're rich in folate, they're rich in vitamin K, lutein, beta carotene, and those are all linked with slower cognitive decline. So what can you do? Throw a handful of spinach into your smoothie or into your egg scramble in the morning. You barely notice it there, and it's amazing how you can throw, 2 or 3 cups of it in, and it decreases down when you're cooking it or when you're chopping it up in the smoothie, and you barely even realize it's there. Number 2 is other vegetables. At least 1 additional vegetable per day beyond those leafy greens. And variety does matter. Colorful, the different colors of the rainbow. I'm sure you've heard people say that, eat the rainbow, right? So colorful vegetables, each of them provide different antioxidants that can combat that brain inflammation, right? So we have the dark green leafies, and then we have the bright reds and orange and yellows. So just try to get a little variety in there if you can. Berries are so good, and trying to get at least 2 servings per week. Now that's not a huge amount. And blueberries and strawberries are the most studied. And what are in those berries? They're called flavonoids. And they've been shown to improve that communication between our brain cells and decrease that oxidative stress. And this is one of the easiest swaps. Throw some berries into your yogurt, throw it into your smoothie, throw it into your oatmeal, or even just, add it in as a snack. Maybe you put a little protein with it. Those are kind of an easy one, especially as we're coming into the spring. And, they're going to be coming into season, and they taste so much better when they're in season versus in the wintertime. They don't always have lots of flavor, but I'm a big fan of getting them frozen and throwing them into my smoothies and stuff. Easy that way. Number 4 is nuts. We're shooting for 5 or more servings per week. Now, 1 serving is not a huge amount, right? It can be just a small handful. But those nuts give us those healthy fats, vitamin E, and also some really good anti-inflammatory compounds. And vitamin E in particular has been linked to reduced cognitive decline. Next is olive oil. Olive oil and extra virgin olive oil, using that as your primary cooking fat is ideal. It's enriched in something called oleocanthal. And that's a compound. It has powerful anti-inflammatory properties that can actually help clear something called amyloid plaques, which are the plaques they see in your in the brain of those with Alzheimer's, and it's protein buildup. Okay. Next are whole grains. Always 3 or more servings a day. 1 serving is typically between 1/3 and 1/2 cup, so it's not a lot, right? And we're going to get those whole grains in like our oats and our quinoa, our brown rice, whole grain breads. You could do, anything that hasn't been overly processed, so it has some good fiber in it. And what it helps us do is support that steady blood sugar and provide more consistent fuel to the brain, because our brain needs carbohydrates. It runs on glucose and it loves consistency, meaning it doesn't enjoy the roller coaster ride of blood sugar highs and lows. Not to mention, we know that when we have those, that's going to increase inflammation as well. So nice, steady blood sugars. And I've talked about that so many different times, just because that is a huge piece when it comes to supporting our hormones, right? And getting them off that roller coaster is blood sugar management. So the whole grain's got some great fiber in it. Next is fish. We're shooting for at least 1 serving per week. Fatty fish is going to be preferred. So things like salmon, sardines, mackerel, trout. Because specifically omega-3 fatty acids, or I should say specifically one is called DHA. Those are essential for our brain cell structure and function. 1 serving a week, that's not a big deal. Of fish, you could do that, right? Next are beans and legumes, and we're shooting for 4 or more servings per week. And they have amazing fiber. They're going to promote good gut health, which we also know can be, when we don't have good gut health, can increase inflammation in our body. So, all this kind of like works together. It's not like it's like one way that it helps us. It's going to be helping us in lots of ways. But those beans and legumes, they have fiber, they have B vitamins, and they have some good plant-based protein. And it helps to support our gut. And the gut-brain connection is like a whole nother episode that we can talk about. And you know what? Maybe I'll write that down. And it's fascinating. It really is. People don't realize that, that our gut and our brain are communicating, right? So when one is not healthy, it's the other's, going to be hurting as well. So next are poultry. Poultry, we're shooting for at least 2 servings a week. And that, that's just a matter of lean protein sources help to support our neurotransmitter production. And the last one, which that is kind of an optional one. And with current research, I think we're moving a little bit more away from alcohol, but I'm gonna say it, so the Mind diet actually includes a moderate wine intake, up to 1 glass per day. Which, 7 per week is kind of a lot. I would say that, it can show, that there is a possible antioxidant benefit from that resveratrol in the red wine. But if you don't drink, don't start for this reason. The benefit is very modest, and the rest of the diet carries more of the weight, right? So this is just a little side piece. And like I said, there's a lot more research currently that's we're kind of leaning away from alcohol intake and moving more towards the approach that none is better. I actually did another episode on it's called Wine Nut. I will link that episode in the show notes if you want to listen in on that one. But now I want to move on to the 5 foods that we should be limiting when it comes to the Mind diet. And I'm, not trying to preach. This does not mean you can never have these things. This is just, these are the foods that they see can increase inflammation that aren't as good for us. And I'll talk a little bit about why. So number 1 is red meat. And the goal is to limit to fewer than 4 servings per week. And what I find really funny is that I think what they say is less than 18 ounces a week, which to me seems like a lot. It seems like a lot, right? So that would probably be, it's going to be 4 ounce plus servings per week. I would probably limit it to maybe 2 or 3 4-ounce servings a week. And the only reason is the saturated fat can promote inflammation, and that can also increase risk of cardiovascular disease, and that is linked to cognitive decline. Next is butter and margarine. We're shooting for less than 1 tablespoon a day. And margarine's kind of like I would probably more recommend butter than I would margarine, especially if margarine has the trans fats, because we don't want trans fats. So just replacing those with olive oil where possible. 3 is cheese. Sorry. I love cheese. That's a hard one for me. And we're shooting for less than 1 serving per week. That would be a challenge, but the reasoning is it's higher in saturated fat, right? So you can go with maybe the more soft cheeses. So even like the white cheeses might be a little bit lower in saturated fat as compared to the yellow cheeses. Something to think about. Number 4 is pastries and sweets. Shooting for less than 5 servings a week, which I think still allows you to enjoy your sweets, because that refined sugar drives inflammation, and it can also promote those blood sugar spikes, which are hard on the brain. And this doesn't mean never. It just means we're being more mindful, we're being more intentional. And then the last one is fried or fast food, and we're shooting for less than 1 serving a week, because of the trans fats, and those inflammatory oils can be particularly damaging to brain tissue. And, once again, I just want to say that this isn't about eating perfectly. The research actually showed that benefits even with moderate adherence, not perfect adherence. It's about shifting that pattern over time, not, that overnight transformation. Because those small, consistent changes can really, compound into larger results. And this is exactly what this whole podcast is all about. So pulling all this together, we talked a little bit about why brain fog in menopause is not in your head. And well, technically it is in your head, but it's real, it's biological, and it's driven largely by that decrease in estrogen and its impact on your brain memory centers, your sleep, and your inflammation levels. We talked about why women in their 40s and 50s are starting to, think more about Alzheimer's and dementia in a way that we never did before, and why it's actually worth paying attention to. And then we went over the mind diet. And I want to say, you look into it, read about it. It's super interesting. But it is a specific research-backed eating pattern that's been shown to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's by up to 53% in those who follow it closely. And it's just built around those 10 food groups that support and protect our brain health, as well as kind of decreasing on those 5 food groups that are going to be more to, they're going to be promoting the inflammation and the damage that can accelerate cognitive decline. So what can you do starting this week? Think about, how can I add 1 additional serving of those leafy greens to your day's intake? Swapping out maybe your candy bar or your other snack for a handful of blueberries and walnuts. Switching to olive oil, as your go-to cooking fat, and adding 1 serving of fatty fish to your weekly meal plan. These aren't dramatic changes. They're just small, kind of strategic shifts that are telling your brain, I'm going to take care of you. And next week, I am going to go into how exercise, strength training, how that affects brain health, because I think that's another really important piece. Okay, so stay tuned, listen in next week for that one. It's so interesting. It really is. If today's episode, it's, opened your eyes a little bit to that connection between, what we're eating, how our brain functions, I want you to share it. Send it to a girlfriend, who has been joking around about, losing her memory, because I promise she needs to hear this. And if you haven't followed the podcast yet, please do that right now, because next week we're coming back for part 2. And I just, you don't want to miss that one, right? And remember, this is about progress over perfection. We're in this for the long haul, and this is your season of strength. Have an amazing day.